So let me just ask you, how do you think the Antitrust Division should assess competitive impact in markets that are dominated by tech firms that do not have readily comparable market prices? In other words, that hold out their products much of the time as being completely 100% free.
Certainly, I would.
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, where we defend faith, family, freedom, and the constitutional values that built America. Before we begin, hit the like button, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest reactions from Washington. Today, we're looking at a Senate confirmation hearing where Senator Josh Hawley questioned a nominee for a major federal antitrust position. The hearing focused on the enormous power of big tech, whether supposedly free social media platforms should still face antitrust scrutiny, and whether market concentration is leaving parents with too few choices when it comes to protecting children online.
And I will enter this into the record. Mr. Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Congratulations on your nominations. I'd just like to note for the record, won't count against my time, that Senator Welch voluntarily stopped when his time expired. Something I've never seen, or rarely on this committee, and certainly, as the ranking member can attest, something I have never done in my life.
Well, I object to that. I object that he was on time.
All right, well, I'll try not to make that mistake. Mr. Candube, I enjoyed our conversation the other day, and congratulations on your nomination. Let's start, if we could, by talking a little bit about antitrust and individual liberty. Something that you said recently caught my eye. You said antitrust law, and I'm going to quote you now, can combat dominant firms' baleful effects on democratic institutions such as free speech, the marketplace of ideas, and shareholder control. I assume that's still your opinion.
It is, Senator.
I take that to mean that antitrust analysis under federal law is not therefore limited to consumer price. Is that a fair inference?
I support the consumer welfare standard, of course, but it can be measured by other things than simply price.
Yeah, and this is my point. I mean, the Sherman Act protects competition by outlawing a restraint of trade and monopolization more broadly. It nowhere mentions consumer welfare. Now, courts, of course, have constructed the consumer welfare standard, but antitrust laws apply to products that are ostensibly free to consumers. Would you agree with that?
I believe so.
So let me just ask you, how do you think the Antitrust Division should assess competitive impact in markets that are dominated by tech firms that do not have readily comparable market prices? In other words, that hold out their products much of the time as being completely 100% free.
Certainly, I would always look to ensure that there is an actual anti-competitive harm, which would require using the traditional tests of market power, and I'm not at all interested in abandoning them. However, I do believe, as you pointed out, Senator, that there are instances in which our civil rights, particularly free speech, can be at issue, and in those situations, the division should act to protect Americans.
Is it fair to say then that under your leadership, the division would not treat this claim that the price is zero as a reason to close an investigation into a dominant platform?
Zero pricing goods like social media present a very interesting and puzzling, sometimes to economists, challenge on how to value that. However, I do not believe at all that simply because something is zero price that it necessarily escapes antitrust scrutiny.
Good. Okay, good. I think that's a very important principle to get established, because that is, as you know, the common defense of all of these tech companies as to why they should elude any antitrust scrutiny at the outset. Let me ask you about another implication of antitrust. In the social media market, there are roughly 3 firms, maybe at most, that dominate overwhelmingly the content that reaches the average 12-year-old in this country. Now, I'm a father of 3 children, all that age and younger. Let me just ask you, do you regard that kind of concentration as properly the concern of the Antitrust Division?
Certainly. As we all know from our antitrust classes, bigness is not necessarily bad. Concentration is but the first step, but it's the first step. And markets that are concentrated will, of course, get the attention of my division, should I be so fortunate as to be confirmed.
Good. That's exactly what I'm driving at. And let me just give you the perspective of one parent, which is that when there's no competition for parental controls, no competition out there that would allow a parent to choose greater safety for his children or her children, then you're leaving essentially the parents totally at the mercy of the platforms. In this case, the fact that there's just 2 or 3 dominant platforms, none of whom have any real interest, let me just call it like it is, any real interest whatsoever in protecting children online. In fact, who have a massive financial interest in pushing the most exploitative material possible, and certainly the most addictive material possible, to all of our children online, because it benefits them financially. That leaves me and millions of other parents like me nowhere to go. And I think the fact that there's no robust competition is a huge part of this problem. I would just like to ask you if you will commit to coordinating with the FTC, which has some jurisdiction here, as well as state attorneys general, to prioritize child safety online. Will that be a priority for you?
Absolutely, sir.
Good. Well, my time has expired, and a radical departure from my normal practice, I will cease and desist here. But I will have questions for the record. I'm sure other folks on the panel are just devastated I didn't ask you questions. So I'll give you some questions for the record as well. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Hawley starts with a little humor, joking about senators actually stopping when their time expires. But then he gets straight to an issue conservatives should be paying attention to: antitrust law and individual liberty. Hawley points to the nominee's previous statement that antitrust law can address the harmful effects dominant corporations may have on institutions like free speech and the marketplace of ideas. The nominee stands by that position and says consumer welfare isn't necessarily measured by price alone. And that's important. Think about the biggest social media platforms. Most Americans don't pay money simply to create an account. The companies can say, our product is free. But does $0 mean there's no economic power involved? Absolutely not. These companies can generate billions of dollars because your attention, advertising exposure, engagement, and data have tremendous value. A platform shouldn't automatically escape legitimate antitrust scrutiny simply because you aren't paying a monthly subscription. Hawley specifically asks whether claiming a product has a zero price should be enough to shut down an investigation into a dominant platform. The nominee essentially says no. That's the correct principle. Being successful isn't illegal, and being a huge corporation isn't automatically evidence of wrongdoing. Conservatives believe in capitalism, private enterprise, and allowing businesses to succeed. But capitalism depends on competition. If a company became dominant because it created the best product and consumers voluntarily chose it, that's the free market working. But if evidence shows a dominant company illegally restricting competition, then antitrust authorities have a responsibility to investigate under the law. Then Hawley moves into what I believe is the most important part of this exchange: children. He argues that only a handful of major technology companies dominate much of the online content reaching young Americans. As a father himself, Hawley asks what happens when parents don't have meaningful alternatives. This is where the conversation becomes bigger than corporate economics. Parents across America are fighting for influence over what their children see online, while algorithms are designed to keep users watching, scrolling, clicking, and engaging. Companies make money from attention. The longer people remain on a platform, the more opportunities there can be to generate revenue. So parents deserve to know what happens when the material generating maximum engagement isn't necessarily what's healthiest for a child. That doesn't mean every technology company is automatically guilty of wrongdoing. Evidence matters, due process matters, and accusations aren't proof. But parents deserve choices. Imagine real competition where one platform says, we have stronger parental controls. Another responds with better protections. Another gives parents greater transparency over recommendations. Another develops a genuinely safer environment for younger users. That's competition working for families. But when a tiny number of platforms dominate the market, Hawley's argument is that parents can find themselves choosing between companies operating under similar incentives. As conservatives, we should understand something clearly. Supporting free enterprise does not require blindly defending every corporation. A corporation isn't the Constitution. Our principles should be freedom, competition, family, private property, and equal enforcement of the law. At the same time, we need to be extremely careful about government power. Protecting children cannot become an excuse for Washington to build a censorship machine. We don't want federal bureaucrats deciding which lawful political opinions Americans are allowed to express. We don't want government officials secretly pressuring private companies to silence viewpoints they dislike. We can protect children while protecting the First Amendment. We can enforce antitrust laws without turning America into a government-controlled economy. Hawley asked the nominee whether market concentration involving just a few dominant platforms deserves attention from the Antitrust Division. The nominee agrees, while correctly noting that concentration itself doesn't automatically prove wrongdoing. Exactly. Investigate the evidence. Are competitors being unfairly blocked? Are dominant companies using illegal tactics to preserve their position? Can new businesses realistically enter the market? Are consumers losing meaningful choices? Those should be serious questions rather than political talking points. Hawley finally asks whether the nominee will coordinate with the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general to prioritize child safety online. The answer is absolutely. Now Americans need to hold Washington to that promise. We've heard countless promises during confirmation hearings. What matters is what officials do after they're confirmed. If a giant corporation violates antitrust law, investigate it. If it hasn't violated the law, leave it alone. That's equal justice. And this is where conservatives need consistency. Big government can threaten liberty, but enormous corporate power deserves scrutiny when it crosses legal boundaries too. We shouldn't replace corporate power with government power. We should protect a genuinely competitive marketplace under constitutional law. The family must remain at the center of this conversation. Government cannot replace parents. Technology cannot replace parents. But parents deserve meaningful tools and real choices when deciding what their children experience online. And with artificial intelligence, algorithms, and social media becoming even more powerful, this debate is only beginning. Should dominant big tech platforms face stronger antitrust scrutiny even when their services are supposedly free? Would greater competition give parents better and safer choices? Or are you concerned Washington could use these arguments to expand government control over online speech? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe in faith, family, freedom, free speech, and constitutional government, like this video, subscribe to Freedom Forge and share it with someone who needs to hear this discussion. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop defending liberty.